Alright, so I think I'm going to break this into two videos here. This first one is I just want to kind of like get you kind of comfortable with this whole idea of abstract. So what in the heck is an abstract? An abstract is a brief, concise summary of a scientific investigation. It begins a scientific research paper and allow other scientists a glimpse at the research to decide if reading the entire paper is worth their time, because an actual scientific research paper can be very long. And before they invest a lot of time into reading all that research, an abstract will give them a glimpse. So before we get into the parts of writing our abstracts, I want to actually take a little look. So let's say you're a scientist and you're like, hey, or if you're interested about something and want to do some research on it, um, of course we Google it, right? So if I just type in like soccer, the results I get are like stories, ESPN, Wikipedia, FIFA, all these different things. But eventually you could get into like all sorts of like opinions and blogs and individual people's information on it. But if I'm gonna look for more scientific published research, we would go to Google Scholar instead. And Google Scholar, it works the same way as like normal Google, but now you're only searching within published research articles or sometimes books. So now if I type soccer in here, I'm going to get very different results. So now it's all these things that are cited, and you can actually look at related articles. So this first one, it says what it was published in, who the author was, the physiology of soccer with special reference to intense intermittent exercise. So again, these things are very different than um, like a typical Google search. So if I go here and let's say I click on the activity profile of competition soccer and I want to read more about that, it takes me to the um, website of the organization, like the database. Sometimes it can take you to the actual journal in which this was published. So, like advanced scientists, they need to publish their research. So they have these scientific studies, but then again, before I jump into actually reading the entire research, which may be tons of pages long, I have this abstract here. And it's kind of broken up into three places. Notice, like with this abstract, there's no graph here. There are definitely numbers involved, but the typical pattern in which scientists write abstracts are they have like the purpose of the research. So it tells you like what they were trying to research, the relationship between the observed activity during match play and blood lactate values was examined. And then it talks about like how far they ran and what they were doing and finding the relationship. It's like summarizing the data. And then it gets into like the very end part here is what do the results suggest, or what is the conclusion brought about from the research. So there might be 80 pages of this actual research paper, but in one paragraph here you can get the gist of what was the purpose, what is the data, a little bit of glimpse at the data, which helps you draw a general conclusion. So the next thing I want to do here is take a look at like um, if you're writing a lab report or a research paper, how do you actually break this down? And at the end of AP Bio, before people would go to college, instead of just writing abstracts, I have them write entire research papers as like the last unit of the year. So if you have a lab report or a research paper, you have a title and then the abstract, which is a brief summary. So again, it comes right away in the beginning of the paper, because if this were published on Google Scholar or in something else, people could read the abstract and then decide if reading the rest of the paper was what they were looking for. So then after the abstract, there's an introduction, and then there's a section about materials and methods, And then they have results, which is all the data, and then they have a discussion, which is the interpretation of the data, and then they have their literature cited. So again, this is how scientists write. You see, it's factual, not fancy. It's straightforward. It's not clever, cute, or creative. This isn't like creative writing. This is like get to the point, tell the science, and keep moving there. So again, I want to get you into understanding what scientists do. So we're going to look at this format in the lens of this particular research that I'm familiar with. So I took a graduate class on strength and conditioning out in Colorado, and my professor did this research and published this research. And the study was on the effects of beta-alanine supplementation on performance and body composition in collegiate wrestlers and football players. So this Ben Kern was my professor, and this was published in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research. So again, before you get into like the entire research here, which again, that would it's an investment in the amount of time it would take to read the entire thing, right? So the first thing you would look at is the abstract. And again, it's broken up into different parts. So here's the title, where it was, and then the purpose. So it starts out talking about the purpose of the research. The purpose of the study was to examine the effectiveness of beta-alanine as an ergogenic aid in tests of anaerobic power output after 8 weeks of high-intensity interval repeated sprint and resistance training in previously trained collegiate wrestlers and football players. So that's what they're trying to figure out. That includes the independent variable and the dependent variable. And then it talks about here the data that's part of the results. And then at the very end here, so all this part is talking about what they found as the results of their experiment or their research. And at the very end is the general conclusions. And you'll notice as if you read a lot of these things, they're never like, oh, this is the way it is. It's just like the data suggests or beta-alanine appears to have the ability to augment performance. They're never like beta-alanine is the greatest thing in the world. You should all do this. You know, they always just kind of in this particular scenario, the way we tested it, it seems to have these effects. So again, those are the three parts of the abstract, but then like to actually dive a little deeper into how a scientific research paper is organized, it gets into the introduction, which is a literature review, which is already known about the topic. So again, this introduction, you'll notice as we scan through this introduction to this research, it has all of these like citations here because all of these footnotes or endnotes, they link to all of this research that's done by other people that these scientists have already read all these other people's research to try and find out what they might do to increase the knowledge in this area. So the introduction is a literature review of what's already known about beta-alanine or high-intensity training. From there, it goes into the materials and methods, what was used and how it was used. So we jump back here after the introduction, it gets into the methods. It talks about the approach, the subjects, who was used, the procedures, what they did, what they took, how the exercise testing was done, how they measured the results through lactate, body composition, and the training protocols, what they had them do during that time, and what statistical analysis were done. From there, it gets into the results, which is the data part. When we've just been doing this thing all about graphing and all of that kind of stuff. So now they're going to get into the data. And here, the results. It gets into these tables, these figures. So it has all of, if we look at these a little closer. Oh, look at that. Standard error bar heading up. Okay, so we're looking at all of this kind of stuff to see if there's a difference between the placebo, those who did not take any supplements and just exercise, and those that had the supplement and their results. And this particular one is flexed arm hang time. So the time is how long they could hang with a flexed arm pre to post 8 week study. So again, their and body composition has all these different graphs about measuring uh, their ability before and after the research was done, the experiment was done. And then you get into this discussion because, again, a scientist's job is not just to collect data, but then like try and make conclusions from that data. So this discussion, although like we said in the abstract, the major conclusions, that's like one sentence, but they back up a lot of this interpretation of the data. Do you accept or reject your original hypothesis? Speculating towards the cause of the results, suggestions for improvement, the experimental design, future experiments that might clarify areas of doubt in the results. So then in this discussion, again, this is a major, major, major section that really gets into the heart of um, the analysis of the research and how good it was and applications. And then it gets into the references, which I have here as literature cited. And that's basically what real scientists do. So, in these big universities, the people that are teaching the classes don't just teach classes, but they're also required to publish research. So, they are doing science even though they are teaching science. They are scientists doing research on their own and publishing. So, our next unit is about how to write these little paragraph summaries, and but it's good to have a context of like how scientists write and everything behind that.